The fog had thinned by late afternoon, lifting in slow ribbons in the grass, as if the land itself were exhaling. She stood just beyond the barn now, boots sunk into damp earth, hands curled inside the sleeves of her jacket. The silence pressed close, not empty but listening. Wind slid through broken boards and carried the smell of rot, hay, and something warm beneath it all. She had come to the homestead believing it was hollow, believing nothing waited for her here. That belief had cracked the moment she heard breathing that did not belong to her. Inside the barn, the horse remained still, not calm, not resting, still in the way wounded animals become when movement has only ever led to pain. Its ribs rose and fell unevenly, each breath sounding like a question. One eye caught the light spilling through the open door, dark and alert, tracking her without blinking. The animal's size should have been intimidating, but what filled the space instead was exhaustion. The horse looked as though it had been surviving rather than living, existing inside the barn the way someone might live inside a memory they could not escape. She took a step back, heart knocking once hard. Logic returned in sharp fragments. This was not her responsibility. She had no money for veterinarians, no strength for another broken thing, no plan beyond sleeping and waking without being asked to care. The deed in her pocket was thin as paper and heavier than anything she owned. $1 bought land, not miracles. She told herself that leaving the barn door open was kindness enough, that someone else would find the horse, someone better equipped, someone unafraid. Yet her feet refused to turn. The horse shifted then, just slightly, hooves scraping wood. The sound sliced through her chest. She saw the marks along its flank, old scars layered over newer ones, history written in flesh. Someone had tried to own this animal once, had failed it, and then vanished. She knew that shape of abandonment too well. It lived behind her ribs, in the way she avoided phone calls, in the way she flinched from hope, because hope had learned how to hurt her precisely. She knelt without deciding to, lowering herself until the cold seeped through denim and into bone. From this angle the horse's, I was level with hers. They watched each other, both measuring distance, both aware that crossing it would change something irreversible. Her breath slowed. The barn smelled older down here, like years folded into dust. She became aware of how small she felt, how unguarded. If the horse lunged, she would not be fast enough. If it trusted her, she would not be ready. Time stretched then. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the apple she had brought for herself, its skin bruised from travel. The motion was deliberate, exaggerated, as if moving underwater. She set it on the ground between them and slid it forward an inch at a time, then withdrew her hand completely. The horse did not move. She waited until her knees ached, until doubt rose like static. Then the animal lowered its head, nostrils flaring, breath ghosting over her fingers without touching them. The apple disappeared with a single crunch. Something loosened in her chest. She did not smile. Joy felt too loud for this place. Instead, she exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and surrender. She knew the risk now. Feeding meant returning. Returning meant staying. Stay meant allowing this land, this animal, to witness her, to pull her into a story she had not intended to tell. She rose slowly, careful not to startle, and backed away toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped. Evening light spilled gold across the floor, catching dust in its glow, turning ruin into something almost holy. The horse watched her, apple gone, hunger quieted but not erased. She understood then that rescue was not a single act, but a promise made again and again. She could walk away tonight and preserve the fragile isolation she had come here for. Or she could stay and risk being needed. She closed the barn door partway, leaving it ajar, a compromise that fooled no one. Outside, the land felt different, charged. She leaned her forehead against the wood and let herself rest there, just for a moment, listening to the steady breathing on the other side. Fear still lived in her, but it no longer ruled her. She straightened, wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, and began making plans she pretended were temporary. The night settled in quietly, as if approving the choice she had made. She returned at dawn, the decision already made long before her feet touched the cold grass. The sky was pale and unfinished, The kind of morning that felt borrowed rather than owned. Frost silvered the fence posts, and her breath came out in thin clouds that vanished as quickly as they formed. She carried a bucket of water in one hand and a sack of feed in the other, each step careful, as though the land itself might change its mind and send her away. The barn loomed ahead, quiet but no longer empty. Something inside it knew she was coming. She paused at the door, listening. The horse shifted its weight, with creaking softly beneath hooves. No panic, no charge toward the sound of her arrival. That alone felt like permission. She opened the door wider than before and set the bucket down just inside, retreating immediately, her movements slow and measured. The horse watched from the shadows, head low, muscles tight beneath skin that still bore the memory of restraint. Trust, she understood, was not something she could ask for. It had to be earned in increments too small to notice. The first days passed in fragments. She came and went without ceremony, leaving food, changing water, speaking only when silence felt too sharp. The horse tested her patience in quiet ways, turning its body block access, stamping once when she stepped too close, refusing touch as though it had learned that hands were promises easily broken. Each small rejection stung more than she expected. She told herself it was foolish to care this much, that she had come here to be alone, not to negotiate with fear wearing a familiar shape. But something in her softened anyway. She began sitting on an overturned crate just inside the barn, far enough away to be safe, close enough to be present. She did nothing but breathe and exist in the same space. Dust motes floated between them like suspended time. The horse learned the sound of her breathing, the rhythm of her arrival, the way she always left before dusk. Consistency, she realized, was its own language. She had never been fluent in it before. On the fourth morning, rain arrived without warning, drumming against the tin roof in uneven bursts. The temperature dropped, and the horse's coat darkened as damp crept into the barn. She stood there longer than usual, watching the animal shiver, watching herself hesitate. Helping meant crossing the line she had drawn for survival. It meant admitting she was capable of care, that she might be capable of loss again. Her hands shook as she reached for the old blanket she had found in the house, moth-eaten but warm. She moved slowly, step by step, narrating her actions in a voice so low it felt like a prayer. The horse backed away at first, whites of its eyes flashing, body coiling. She stopped immediately, heart hammering, and waited. Rain hammered the roof harder, filling the silence with urgency. Finally, inch by inch, she advanced again, laying the blanket over a fence rail instead of the horse's back. She stepped away and sat down, leaving the choice where it belonged. Minutes passed. Then the horse approached the blanket, sniffed it, nudged it with its nose. When it finally draped the fabric over its own shoulders, the gesture was clumsy and imperfect, but it was enough. She pressed her lips together to keep from crying. Victory felt too loud a word for what this was. It was simply relief. The bond did not arrive all at once. It crept in through routine and repetition, through the quiet agreement that neither of them would disappear. She learned the horse's moods by the set of its ears, the tension in its neck. The horse learned her limits by the way she froze when it stepped too close, by the way she always gave ground before asking for it back. They met each other where they were, not where they wished to be. One evening, as the sun slipped low and painted the barn in amber light, the horse stood close enough that she could feel its warmth without touching it. The space between them narrowed to breath and dust. She raised her hand without thinking, stopped halfway, then lowered it again. The horse leaned forward instead, just enough that its shoulder brushed her arm. The contact was brief, accidental in appearance, but it sent a shock through her chest. She closed her eyes and let the moment pass without trying to hold it. She did not realize she was smiling until her face ached. That night, alone in the small house, she slept without dreaming for the first time in years. Outside, the horse stood in the barn, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of her, listening to the wind move through broken boards, breathing steadily. Neither of them knew what this would become. They only knew that something had begun, something fragile and real, and that walking away now would hurt more than staying. The change did not announce itself. It arrived the way spring does in stubborn places, quietly, unevenly, with setbacks that looked like failure, if you weren't paying attention. She noticed it first in the mornings. The horse no longer retreated fully into the shadows when she opened the barn door. It stayed where it was, head lifted, eyes tracking her without panic. The distance between them remained, but it no longer felt like a wall. It felt like space. She began bringing a second bucket, scrubbing it clean before filling it, an act so ordinary it surprised her with its tenderness. Her days organized themselves around these small rituals. Wake, feed, sit, leave, return. The repetition steadied her in ways she had forgotten were possible. Time stopped slipping through her fingers. It gathered instead, forming something solid beneath her feet. The horse tested boundaries as trust grew, stepping closer than before, then flinching back at sudden sounds. Each reaction taught her something, not just about the animal, but about herself. She saw how quickly she still braced for rejection, how instinctively she withdrew when fear flickered. Caring for the horse meant confronting those reflexes daily. It meant choosing patience when her chest tightened, choosing gentleness when old anger tried to surface. She had spent years surviving by becoming smaller. Now something asked her to remain present. The first other human arrived without invitation. An older man from down the road stopped at the fence one afternoon, his truck idling as he watched her refill the trough. He didn't cross onto the land. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the barn. When she finally noticed him, she expected questions. Instead, he nodded once, slow and respectful, and said, "Didn't think that place would wake up again." She didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. He left after a few minutes, but the air felt altered after he was gone, as if the homestead had been seen and decided to remain. Over the next weeks, others followed in the same quiet way. A woman walking her dog paused by the fence. 2 children rode their bikes past more slowly than necessary. No one asked permission. No one spoke much. They came to look at the horse standing in the open doorway, alive and undeniable. The horse noticed them too. It lifted its head at unfamiliar voices, ears swiveling, body tense but curious. She stayed close on those days, positioning herself where the animal could see her. Her presence became an anchor. That realization startled her. Somewhere along the way, she had become a constant in someone else's world. The weight of that responsibility was frightening, but it also filled a hollow place inside her she had never named. One afternoon, a boy lingered longer than the others. He stood by the fence, small hands gripping the wire, eyes fixed on the horse with an intensity that bordered on ache. She felt the pull to intervene, to protect the fragile balance she and the animal had built. Instead, she waited. The horse stepped closer to the door, then stopped. The boy did not move. The moment stretched, thin and trembling. Finally, the boy exhaled and smiled, not wide, not loud, but with something like recognition. He waved once and ran back toward the road. She watched him go, chest tight, understanding that something had passed between them that did not belong to her alone. That night, she sat in the barn longer than usual, the air cooling around her as dusk deepened. The horse stood beside her now, not touching, but near enough that she could feel its heat against her shoulder. She rested her hand against her own knee, resisting the urge to reach out. Trust, she had learned, grew best when it was not rushed. The horse shifted its weight, then leaned, deliberately this time, pressing its side into her arm. The contact was solid and unmistakable. She did not pull away. She let her hand rise, slow as snowfall, and rest against the curve of its neck. The horse stilled completely, breath deepening, muscles softening under her palm. The world narrowed to that point of connection, to the feel of coarse hair and steady warmth. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept her breathing even, her touch light. This was not a victory. It was an agreement. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass, carrying the sounds of evening across the land. Somewhere beyond the fence, a door closed, a car passed, life continuing in ways she no longer felt separate from. She stayed until the light faded and the barn grew dark, until the horse shifted again and stepped away on its own terms. When she finally left, she did not look back. She didn't need to. The bond was there, holding without pressure. In the days that followed, the homestead felt fuller. Not louder, not busy, but inhabited. She found herself repairing small things she had ignored before. A loose board, a broken latch. The work felt purposeful, connected to something larger than her own survival. She began to understand that what was happening here was not just rescue. It was restoration, unfolding outward in quiet circles. Standing at the fence one morning, watching the horse move freely within the space they had made together, she felt a shift settle deep inside her. This place, this animal, these unspoken moments, they were changing her shape from the inside out. She was no longer hiding. She was becoming visible again, and the realization thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. She rested her hand on the fence post and smiled, not because everything was healed, but because it was healing. And for the first time since she arrived, she understood that what she was building here might matter far beyond the boundaries of the land. The shift became undeniable the morning she unlocked the gate and left it open. It wasn't a grand gesture. There were no signs nailed up, no announcement made to the town that something new was beginning. She simply stood there with the padlock in her hand, fingers cold, heart steady, and chose not to close the boundary again. The horse watched from the pasture, ears flicking forward as the gate swung wide. Freedom, she had learned, was not the absence of limits, but the presence of trust. People came slowly at first, as if unsure whether they were allowed to hope. A woman arrived one afternoon with her teenage daughter. The girl's shoulders hunched inward, eyes fixed on the ground. They stayed by the fence, speaking little, listening more. The horse approached on its own, stopping a careful distance away. The girl looked up then, startled, and something in her posture loosened. She did not reach out. Neither did the horse. That restraint, that mutual respect, felt like the language of this place now. Word traveled without effort. A veteran who hadn't slept through the night in years came and stood near the barn at dusk, hands shaking, breath shallow. She didn't ask his story. She showed him where to sit and left him there with the sound of the horse's breathing and the slow rhythm of evening settling over the land. When she returned an hour later, he was asleep, head tipped back, face slack with a peace that startled her more than any confession could have. She began to understand that the homestead was no longer just hers. It had become a quiet refuge, shaped not by rules but by presence. The horse moved among them with a calm authority, sensing fear before it was spoken, offering stillness instead of solutions. She watched people change here, not suddenly, but in ways that lingered. Shoulders lowered, voices softened. Silence became something shared rather than endured. The climax arrived without warning on a clear afternoon washed in sunlight. A small boy stood at the edge of the pasture, gripping a worn baseball cap in both hands. He had not spoken since the accident. His mother sat quietly, eyes shining with apology and hope. She nodded, unsure what to promise. Promises had never lived long in her life. The horse approached the boy slowly, hooves sinking into the grass, stopping just short of him. The boy did not flinch. He lifted his eyes, wide and unguarded, and reached out with trembling fingers. The horse lowered its head, breath warm against the boy's skin. Time seemed to hold itself there, suspended between fear and courage. The boy's lips parted. At first, no sound came. Then, barely louder than the wind, a word emerged, soft, broken, real. His mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. She felt her own chest crack open, a rush of emotion so sharp it stole her breath. This was not magic. It was connection, earned through patience and care, through the courage to stay when leaving would have been easier. She stepped back, giving the moment room to exist without her. The horse stood steady, accepting the boy's touch as if it had always been waiting for it. Around them, the land glowed, every blade of grass alive with meaning. She realized then that this place had grown beyond her pain, beyond her plans. It had become a living testament to what happens when broken things are allowed to heal together. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the pasture, she stood alone by the fence. The horse wandered back toward her, stopping close enough that she could feel its presence without looking. She rested her hand against its neck, familiar now, grounding. She understood at last that her purpose had never been to disappear. It had been to bear witness, to pain, to resilience, to the quiet miracles that unfold when someone chooses to stay. The homestead breathed around her, alive and awake, holding stories yet to come. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready for whatever arrived next. Time did what it always does when it is given room. It layered meaning over moments until they became memory, and memory until it became purpose. The homestead changed subtly, almost shyly, as if afraid to draw attention to itself. Footpaths formed where people walked the same ground again and again. The barn no longer smelled only of dust and age, but of fresh hay, soap, and rain-soaked coats hung to dry. Laughter appeared in brief. Surprise bursts, like birds testing whether it was safe to land. She learned the rhythms of others without asking for their stories. A man came every Tuesday and sat with his back against the fence, eyes closed, breathing in time with the horse's slow steps. A young woman arrived before sunrise, helping with chores in silence, her hands steady even when her eyes were not. Children came after school, their voices hushed instinctively, as though they sensed this place demanded a different kind of attention. No one stayed forever. No one left unchanged. The horse moved through it all with an ease that still amazed her. It accepted touch now, not from everyone, not always, but with a discernment that felt intentional. It chose moments, chose people. She watched it stand beside those who needed grounding, offering its weight, its warmth, its unspoken certainty. In caring for the horse, she had expected to give. She had not anticipated how much she would be taught in return, about boundaries, about patience, about the strength of stillness. One evening, as the sky bruised purple and gold, she realized she had stopped counting days since her arrival. The ache that once lived permanently in her chest had softened into something like tenderness. Pain had not vanished. It had transformed, woven into the work of tending, of welcoming, of holding space without fixing. She no longer felt the urge to disappear. She felt rooted. The horse stood with her at the fence, watching the last visitors leave, the sound of their tires fading down the road. She rested her forehead briefly against its neck, a gesture so natural now it surprised her with its simplicity. The animal breathed out, long and deep, and she matched it without thinking. In that shared breath, she understood that healing was not a destination reached alone, but a process sustained together. Lights flickered on inside the house, warm against the encroaching dark. Tomorrow would bring more needs, more uncertainty, more quiet miracles she could never predict. She felt no fear at the thought, only readiness. The homestead had given her back to herself, and in doing so, had become something larger than refuge. It had become a beginning. The idea did not arrive fully formed. It emerged the way most lasting things do, through necessity, through repetition, through the quiet accumulation of need. She noticed at first when she began storing extra feed, stacking it neatly against the barn wall. As if preparing for winters she could already sense were coming. Then it appeared in the way she started repairing more than what was broken, reinforcing beams that still held, clearing land no one had asked her to clear. Her hands moved with intention now. She was no longer merely responding. She was building. Mornings began earlier. The sky often found her already awake, kettle heating, boots laced, breath steady. The horse greeted her with a low sound that vibrated through its chest, a greeting that felt earned. She brushed its coat until the dust lifted and the scars softened under care. Each stroke was a conversation without words, a confirmation that presence mattered more than perfection. She had learned that here, learned it deeply enough to trust it. Others began offering help without ceremony. A man fixed the fence one afternoon and left before she could thank him. A woman brought old blankets, folded with care. Someone delivered lumber and never returned for payment. The homestead accepted these offerings the way it accepted everything else. Quietly, without judgment, she felt something unfamiliar growing inside her then, something like responsibility paired with hope. Not obligation, but stewardship. The space transformed slowly. A small shelter rose beside the barn, its purpose undefined but its doors open. The pasture expanded, fences mended, paths cleared. She never called a program, never named a project. To name it would have felt like claiming ownership over something that had always belonged to those who needed it. Instead, she let it remain what it was becoming. a place where brokenness was not a flaw, but a common language. The horse adapted with her, moving through the changes with calm assurance. It seemed to understand that its role had shifted, that it was no longer simply surviving, but leading in its own quiet way. She watched people follow its cues, slowing their movements, softening their voices. In those moments, she saw her own transformation reflected back at her. She had become someone others trusted, someone capable of holding space without filling it. One afternoon, as she stood watching a group of visitors sit together in easy silence, the realization settled fully into her bones. This was no longer about escape. It was about continuity. What she was building would outlast her grief, her fear, even her presence. The thought was both humbling and exhilarating. She felt her chest expand with something close to awe. That evening, she walked the perimeter of the land as the sun dipped low, counting steps, noting places where growth pressed close to decay. The horse followed at a distance, unhurried, its silhouette dark against the fading light. When she stopped, it stopped. When she moved, it moved. The synchronization felt sacred, a testament to the trust they had grown together. She thought back to the day she first arrived, carrying nothing but exhaustion and the fragile hope of invisibility. She could barely recognize that version of herself now. This woman, steady, present, rooted, had been shaped by patience, by care given without guarantee of return. Purpose had found her not through ambition, but through attention. As night settled, she returned to the barn and closed the doors gently, leaving space for air and starlight. The horse stood beside her, solid and warm, a living reminder that healing was not an abstract idea, but a practice, renewed daily. She rested her hand against his neck and smiled into the quiet. What she was building did not need to be loud to be lasting. It needed only to remain open, to continue choosing presence over retreat. And as the first stars appeared overhead, she understood that this was a legacy forming. Not a name, not a monument, but a living, breathing promise that broken things, given time and care, could become whole in ways no one ever expects. The seasons turned, and with them the work deepened. What had once been improvisation became intention, not rigid or rehearsed, but grounded. She learned when to step forward and when to let the space hold people on its own. She learned that healing resisted being rushed, that it moved at the speed of trust, which was always slower than fear, but far more durable. The homestead responded to this patience. Grass returned where earth had been trampled bare. The barn stood straighter, its bones reinforced not just with wood, but with use. She no longer flinched when strangers arrived. She greeted them with the same steady presence she offered the horse, letting them find their place without instruction. Some stayed only minutes, hands shoved deep into pockets, eyes darting as if searching for an exit. Others lingered for hours, sitting on overturned buckets or leaning against fence posts, absorbing quiet as though it were medicine. She did not ask what brought them. She had learned that questions were not always an invitation to truth. The horse remained the center of it all, not through dominance, but through calm. It moved with grounded certainty that anchored those around it. Children approached with tentative hands. Adults stood nearby, unsure how to name what they felt. She watched shoulders loosen, watched breath deepen, watched eyes soften in the presence of an animal that asked for nothing but honesty. The horse had become a mirror, reflecting back whatever arrived, unafraid of what it saw. One late afternoon, as clouds gathered low and heavy, a storm threatening but uncommitted, she stood alone in a pasture and felt the full weight of what had taken root here. It was not pride that rose in her, but gratitude, sharp and almost painful in its intensity. She had not planned this life. She had not earned it through ambition or certainty. It had grown because she stayed when it would have been easier to leave, because she listened when silence asked her to. The storm broke gently, rain falling in soft sheets that darkened the soil and cooled the air. She remained where she was, letting it soak her hair and clothes, feeling grounded in a way she had not known was possible. The horse joined her, standing close, unbothered by the rain. Together they faced the open land, the water pooling around their feet, the sky releasing what had been holding back. In that moment, she understood something that had been forming quietly all along. Healing was not a single act or even a series of acts. It was a relationship with place, with others, with oneself, renewed again and again through choice. The legacy forming here was not something she could control or complete. It was something she could tend, protect, and trust to grow beyond her vision. As the rain eased and light returned, she felt no urge to mark the moment, to define it with words. It was enough to stand there, present, breathing in time with a horse, aware of the lives moving gently through the space she helped hold open. Whatever came next would be met the same way this had begun, with patience, with courage, and with a quiet faith that staying mattered. The moment that changed everything did not feel extraordinary at first. It arrived without warning, folded into an ordinary afternoon when the light lay soft across the pasture, and the air carried the scent of cut grass. She had learned by now that the most important things rarely announce themselves. They slipped in quietly, waiting to be noticed. A young man stood near the fence, hands buried deep in the pockets of a jacket too thin for the season. He had been brought by an older woman who hovered at a distance, eyes alert, ready to intervene. The young man's posture held a familiar tension. Shoulders tight, jaw set, gaze fixed anywhere but forward. His movements were careful, as if his body had learned the cost of suddenness. She did not approach him. She had learned better than that. Instead, she stayed where she was, brushing the horse with slow, even strokes, letting the rhythm speak for her. The horse sensed the unease before it showed on the surface. It lifted its head, ears angling toward the young man, then took a step closer, not fast, not hesitant, but deliberate. The young man stiffened. For a moment, she thought he might turn and leave, retreating into the shell that had kept him intact. She held her breath, resisting the urge to intervene, trusting the space they had built together. The horse stopped a few feet away and lowered its head, breathing softly. The sound carried across the short distance like an invitation that asked nothing in return. The young man's hands trembled. He swallowed, once, twice, as if steadying himself against something unseen. Slowly, he pulled one hand free from his pocket. His fingers hovered in the air, uncertain, then dropped back to his side. He exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across his face. She felt the tension coil in her own chest, memories surfacing unbidden, moments when fear had convinced her to withdraw just before connection could form. She stayed still. The horse stayed still. The world narrowed to that small, fragile space between them. Then the young man stepped forward. It was not a large step, but it carried the weight of something monumental. He reached out, palm open, and rested his hand against the horse's neck. The contact seemed to undo him. His shoulders sagged, breath hitching, eyes squeezing shut as if holding back a flood. The horse did not move. It stood steady, accepting the touch with a patience that felt almost reverent. A sound escaped the young man's throat, half laugh, half sob. His knees buckled, and he leaned into the horse's solid presence, forehead pressed against warm muscle. She saw the older woman clasp her hands together, tears streaming freely now, her relief unguarded. No one spoke. There were no instructions to follow, no applause waiting to erupt. The moment did not belong to spectacle. It belonged to release. She felt her own eyes burn, emotion rising fast and fierce. This was the culmination of every quiet choice, every restrained impulse. Every day she had shown up without knowing why. It was proof that what they were building here worked not because it fixed people, but because it gave them permission to feel whole again, even briefly. The young man eventually stepped back, wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket. His expression had changed, not healed, not transformed beyond recognition, but softened as though a door had cracked open inside him. He met her gaze, then really met it, and nodded once. Gratitude passed between them, without words. As the sun dipped lower, casting the pasture in amber light, she stood beside the horse and let the moment settle into her bones. She understood now that this was the heart of it all, the quiet intersections where pain met patience and something new emerged. This was a miracle she had not known to hope for, unfolding exactly as it was meant to, grounded in trust, presence, and the courage to stay. She walked slowly back toward the barn as evening settled over the homestead, the sky streaked with muted golds and bruised purples. Every step felt measured, deliberate, as if the ground beneath her had absorbed the day's revelation and would hold her steady. The air was cool against her cheeks, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and hay, a reminder of the rhythm she had come to inhabit. She paused at the fence, watching the horse graze quietly, its movements fluid, self-assured. There was no urgency here, only presence, an awareness she had learned to value above all else. For the first time in years, she could see herself clearly. Not the woman who had fled heartbreak and sought refuge in isolation, but someone capable of witnessing pain and letting it exist without fear. She realized that her life had been defined for too long by avoidance, by the quiet assumption that showing up was dangerous. The horse, with its patient eyes and unwavering trust, had taught her otherwise. It was not about taming or controlling. It was about consistency, about honoring the unspoken agreements that form when two lives intersect without pretense. She reached out and rested her hand against the coarse hair of the horse's neck. Its warmth seeped into her palm, grounding her. She closed her eyes, feeling the beat of its heart beneath her fingers, and let herself absorb the totality of the day. The boy who had spoken again, the quiet arrivals of strangers, the steady hum of life returning to a place long abandoned. All of it pointed towards something larger than her grief, larger than her carefully measured solitude. A soft wind rustled through the pasture, brushing the leaves of distant trees and lifting stray strands of hair from her face. She exhaled slowly, realizing that she no longer feared being seen. Her presence here, her willingness to stay, had become part of the land itself. Every broken board she repaired, every bucket of water she carried, every silent morning spent sitting beside the horse had built more than a homestead. They had built a space where people could be held without words, where lives to begin again. She stepped back slightly, letting the horse move freely, and felt a thrill rise in her chest, a mixture of awe and gratitude that she had not anticipated. The realization came softly but sharply. She was no longer merely surviving. She was shaping something enduring, something that could outlast her. It was a life built in small, quiet increments, but it carried weight far beyond what she could have imagined. Each day she showed up, each choice to remain present, had compounded into this clarity, this purpose. The horizon deepened to violet as shadows lengthened across the fields. She watched the horse pause in the fading light.
Now, click on the video on the screen to witness an even more miraculous
muscles
story.
Coiled with alert
You'll
calm.
cry, you'll smile, and you'll feel whole again.
Yet it
Click it
sought her
now.
presence
We'll
naturally,
be waiting.
a mutual trust she could neither demand nor take. And in that balance, she recognized a reflection of herself, stronger than she had known, capable of grounding herself without fear, capable of witnessing pain without retreating.